Good day, I'm Andri, and I do warmly welcome you to my literary studies series. This week, I was invited to deliver a brief, personal, or rather, I may say intimate talk about Federico García Lorca's poetry, particularly from the perspective of a translator. I have always found his poems difficult to work on, beyond the superficial level, though as what further suggests, I do hope that I have made some headways with it over the years. There are plenty of very poor translations around, and I do hope so that everyone who is interested in what I do may find on two of my blogs, both Patreon and Buy Me Coffee, translations of Lorca's poetry, both in English and Croatian languages. I have to say that my personal story with Federico maybe begins even before I have read him. But when I did come to read him, I have to say that I was genuinely surprised. I was astonished because Lorca is a remarkable poet. Till now, I have translated a number of his works, and I need to say that one of the great difficulties is to carry over such powerful and such dense metaphorical lapse into English and Croatian languages where they risk sounding very silly and very foggy. Lorca's project was to take up traditional forms, traditional stories, legends, and invest them with a modern vitality. And his central idea in writing was to employ phrases which had never been used before. And that was some kind of attempt to place together, to connect things which had always been considered as belonging to different worlds, to different stories, backgrounds, and contexts. And in that fusion, he was shocking us and give us a new reality. Today, I shall present you one of his best works ever, if you ask me, and that is surely his Romancero Gitano, or his Gypsy Ballads. This is a book of poems published in 1928, and it's made up of 18 ballads revolving around the topic of gypsy lifestyle, gypsy culture, and gypsy customs. The ballads reflect the pains, sorrows, and sufferings of the gypsy people who always were living on the margins of society and were persecuted by the authorities. This is surely one of Lorca's most famous book of poems, and it's also the most bought book of Spanish poems. García Lorca chooses to talk in this very book about the gypsies because he thinks they represent the very essential point of the Andalusian culture. The poems in Romancero Gitano are mainly ballads, all of them joined by the style and the topics they treat and to which they refer to. The poems can be grouped by different thematics, by lyricism, woman topics, women and their dilemmas, the mythical archangels, epics, men, fabules, legends and traditions. The first three poems in the book, Romance de la Luna Luna, Preciosa el aire, Reyerta, they talk about the confrontations between the gypsy world, between this purely, genuinely natural world and several different mythical forces. In the first poem, we deal with death that was represented by the moon. The second, between desire and the masculine instinct, represented by the powerful wind. And in the third poem, that was Reyerta, that is some kind of a world of confrontation against the fights and violence of the gypsies. Romance Sonambulo tells a story of a gypsy smuggler who returns home and finds his wife dead by the despair of waiting for him. In Monja Gitana, the main character is a nun debating between her faith in God and her freedom instincts. La Casada Infiel is about a married woman who gives up her fidelity and was guided by her powerful female sexual instincts. In Romance de la Pena Negra, García Lorca expresses the tragic feeling of the gypsy life through the deep sadness of the figure of Soledad Montoya. There we have mythical archangels. Each of the mythical gypsy archangels represents in this book an emblematic city in Andalusia. San Miguel represents Granada, San Rafael represents Córdoba, and San Gabriel represents Seville. Their placement answers to a geographical order, and the poems are very complex, very hermetic, with a large number of strong and powerful metaphors. Epic and man. These poems can be divided into groups. The first part is composed of 4 poems in which the gypsy character has to face extreme, unpleasant situations. Prendimiento de Antoñito el Camborio and Muerte de Antoñito el Camborio talk about the gypsy dignity. A gypsy is humiliated and murdered, victimed to the jealousy he provokes among his family due to his great qualities. Muerto de Amor tells the story of the death of a young gypsy who dies of sadness from a broken heart. Romance del Emplazado narrates a gypsy's obsession about a predicted omen of death which ends up being true. The second part is the Romance de la Guardia Civil, which shows the destruction of the mythical Andalusian world, always under the menace of mysterious forces that try to destroy it. In this case, this destructive force is symbolized by the Guardia Civil, who enters the villages breaking and killing anything and anyone they find. The last 3 poems in Gypsy Ballads deal with 3 legends with different traditions that Lorca changes slightly to adapt them to the gypsy world and to the gypsy context to reinforce the mythical and universal projection of the gypsies. In the poem El Martirio de Santa Olalla, Lorca turns back to the early Christian era to tell the story of a young woman persecuted by the Romans, the same thing that happened to the gypsies with the Guardia Civil. Burla Don Pedro a Caballo takes us to some kind of very strange literary world. It is a poem about oblivion, about solitude, represented in the lack of love suffered by a knight, a kind of quixotic element in Lorca. Tamar y Amnon is a story based on the book of Samuel, a biblical story that narrates the love story of an incest relationship between brother and a sister. Romancero Gitano has many different characters, many different contexts, but they are not the typical characters, but abstract characters or topics like violence, death, life, love, passion, eroticism. The gypsies' customs clash with those of the conventional world, and this fact provoked some tensions and the shedding of blood. The consequence to this is normally death. Bound to death and bound to violence, we find love. And love, according to Lorca, is a source of frustration. This kind of love is always doomed to failure and appears in the form of a carnal and disturbing eroticism. I have to say, while reading and translating Gypsy Ballads, the gypsies in Lorca's work are not folkloric theme. They're a symbol of the pure and genuine Andalusian culture. It represents the social margination and something exotic, the natural impulses of men and women. They're also the archetype of free men who fight against repression and social violence. The gypsies represent the great, deep, sublime human feelings, and they're subject to a tragic fate. Men and women are presented in very traditional settings. The men are usually mature, sensible, quiet, protective, and very influenced by the customs of their race and people. There are barely any physical descriptions, but the women are described in detail, both physically and psychically, and they are marked by their sadness, by their weakness, by their fragility when faced with difficulties, which turns the men into their protectors. These women are also characterized as symbols for sensuality and highlighted eroticism. Lorca doesn't talk about the black sorrow directly, but through his character, Soledad Montoya. On this topic, the author said, "The sorrow of Soledad Montoya is the root of the Andalusian people. It's not anguish, because sorrow lets you smile, nor is it a blinding pain because it doesn't shed tears. It's an anxiety without an object, a profound love for nothing, a certainty that death is breathing behind the door." The Andalusia that Lorca shows through his works is that very Andalusia that can't be seen. It can only be felt. This is the ancient Andalusia, the Andalusia of the duende, of the black pain, of the black sorrow, of the deep sounds of the occult. In all of Garcia Lorca's works, but especially in this Gypsy Ballads, Romancero Gitano, there's a great number of symbols that the author uses repeatedly. The main symbols are metals, air, green color, mirrors, water, horses, moon, milk, woman, black color, white color. Metals as knives, anvils, rings represent the life and death of the gypsy people. Air or wind stands for a masculine eroticism. The green color represents death. Mirrors the home and sedentary lifestyle. The water, when in movement, stands for life. When stagnant, means death. Horses represent the unstrained passion which leads only to death. Moon. This symbol appears in Gypsy Ballads for 218 times in all the Romancero, and it signifies death and contingency. Milk stands for the natural things. Woman for eroticism. The color, black color, blackness for death, and the white color stands for light or life.